This takes place in the what we call the Medo-Persian Empire. The reason I did this up here is so that we could, there we go, so that we could sort of track who are these people. You know what I mean? So remember, Israel during the kingdom stage had divided. Remember that? That Solomon had really taxed the people very heavily, and so that when Solomon passed and his son Rehoboam followed, Rehoboam, the story goes, went to the older, wiser men of Solomon in the kingdom and said, "What should I do?" And they said, "You have the people's heart, but you need to dial back on the burden that your father put on the people." The younger counselors of Rehoboam said, "No, you need to prove that you are even greater a king than your father. And so you tell them that you think it was hard under my father. It's getting ready to get twice as hard." Well, that's not good advice, but that's the advice he took. And when that happened, the kingdom of Israel split right here. So you've got the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. All right? Now, of course, Jerusalem, I've got the Sea of Galilee in the wrong place. It probably needs to be down here. But anyway, Jerusalem, is in the south. This became known later by a different name, but right now we're just going to leave it as, it became in the Old Testament known as Israel and Judah. Okay? So this is why it gets a little confusing when you're reading the Old Testament, because up until the division, all this is Israel. But then the division happens, and this suddenly is called Edom or Israel, and this is called Jacob or Judah. And the reason it's called by those names a lot of times is it goes back to a prominent person at the beginning. So Judah and Samaria, Israel, it will become Samaria. All right, so then God judges these people. They don't have one godly king. Not one. They're all idolaters. They're all evil. God does send prophets up to preach up here, but it's to no avail. The kingdom is gone. So eventually, God raises up the Assyrians. That's another empire. And the Assyrians, who were vicious, murderous conquerors, they come in and destroy Israel. Okay, so they wipe it out. This part right here. Well, I'm just going to give it a little bit of an X there. And you remember Jonah. Well, Jonah was sent to Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. Okay, so God was sending Jonah. Want to know why Jonah had a little bit of a hard time? God was sending Jonah to some of the most wicked, vicious, evil people on the face of the earth. These people, it's incredible how violent they were. But one of their tactics, and this was popular back in those days, if a kingdom went in and conquered another kingdom, they would take like the upper class women and children, and they would take them back for themselves, and they would train them to be like educated slaves. Okay? The rest of the people, they'd kill all the military, kill all the elderly, kill a lot of the children and all that. What's left, they would transplant. So if they conquered another country, say over here somewhere, they would take almost all of the people who lived here and put them there, and then take these people that was left and put them here. So you can imagine, well, why would they do that? Well, you can imagine if you do that, how disoriented the leftover people would be. There's no way they're going to mount any kind of resistance. They're in a foreign land. They probably don't know the language. They're few in number. They've lost all their leadership or their royalty or any of that. They've all become slaves or been put to death. So this basically neutralized anybody that they conquered from being able to mount any kind of resistance. Okay? Now, when they did that, the capital of the northern kingdom had been the city of Samaria. And Samaria continued, for thousands of years. So by the time Jesus is coming on in the New Testament era, you remember Jesus says, I'm going through Samaria. Remember that? We have the Good Samaritan. So, that's this area right here. The Jews from the southern kingdom considered all of these people up here as heretics and half-breeds. And why? Well, because if there were any Jews left here, they'd been mingled with other ethnic groups that had been conquered by the Assyrians. And then so they eventually intermarried and so forth. So the southern Jews regarded these people as half-breeds. They didn't even consider them to be Jews. All right? So when Jesus says, I must go through Samaria, somebody in the group's probably going, does he know? We don't go through there. A lot of times they would cross the Jordan, and there was an ancient road that went around, and they'd come back across the Jordan up here. There was also a mountain pass that went this way. So you could essentially skip, if you were a southern Jew, you could skip this whole area and not have to deal with the Samaritans. So anyway, that's the Assyrians, and they took care of them. Then, of course, even though the southern kingdom did have the temple, it did have some good kings. Not all of them were good, but some of them were. But they did continue to sin. And God continued to warn them that he was going to judge them if they didn't repent. Remember, God was going to judge them, and Hezekiah pleaded with God. And God said, all right, Hezekiah, I won't destroy Jerusalem and the southern kingdom during your lifetime. Remember that? Okay. So you can see when God says that, the clock's ticking. It's getting ready to happen. We're waiting on one man to pass, essentially. Side note, the oldest man in the Bible, recorded in history, Methuselah, remember him? And Methuselah lived right before what? The flood. He lived 969 years, I believe. You know what Methuselah means? It means when he is dead, it shall be sent. And God tells Hezekiah, I'm not going to bring it in your lifetime. It's a little bit like Hezekiah Methuselah is the canary in the coal mine, you know what I mean? Like, keep this man alive, I don't know that everybody understood what that meant then, but it meant now. But Hezekiah, he certainly knew. Demetrius?
I thought that was Josiah, basically. He was the last king before the king died.
No, I'm not saying Hezekiah was the last king.
Oh, sorry.
He just said that Hezekiah, it would not happen in Hezekiah's lifetime.
Okay.
Yeah. There were other kings after Hezekiah. They had short reigns. Josiah had a short revival, but it didn't really take hold. Yeah. It was just a brief reprieve, but the people got to a place where they would respond, say for instance like Josiah the king enforced the Old Testament law and reinstituted temple worship and these things, and the people would conform obediently to the king, but they still worshiped the idols, and as soon as the king was dead or would let up the pressure, they would go right back into it. So the heart of the people was just gone. And so God eventually, he tells them that he will bring the Babylonians. The Babylonian Empire would come and conquer the southern kingdom. And of course that did happen. In roughly 586 BC, the southern kingdom fell to Babylon. And all of the, most of the wealthy young people were and educated and all that. They knew courtroom procedures and all that. They would capture them and make them slaves. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Ezekiel, they were all part of that, who were captured and taken into Babylon to serve in the Babylonian Empire as servants in this way. All right, so Babylon is the capital city of the Babylonian Empire. Well, eventually the Medes, they conquer the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Okay. And then the Persians grow rapidly and very powerfully, very fast. So they began to essentially absorb the Medes. So it becomes the Medo-Persian Empire. Eventually, it'll just become the Persian Empire, okay? Because the Medes essentially just get absorbed. Now, fun fact. Where is Persia? Yeah, Iran. That's exactly where we are right now. And of course, the city of Babylon is in Iraq. So, isn't that right? Yeah. So, can you see? Okay. So, this whole region, as we think of as Iran, Iraq, all that, that whole region, as you see in your map on the back, was the Persian Empire. It was very large. As it says here in verse 1, that the king Ahasuerus ruled from India to Ethiopia. I mean, this is a very powerful. Okay, so did you have a question before I move on? Okay. I'm sorry, what?
Okay. You got Persia and then Elam.
Mm-hmm.
Was that subdivided?
Elam?
Elam.
Yeah, okay. Elam is like
South.
out here. We would be like in Jordan today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Thinking it was over there off the Persian Gulf area.
I don't think so.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Right, yeah. I'd have to double check, but yeah. I know Edom. I know I might be thinking of Edom. Edom is like right over here because they have Petra was the, yeah. But I'm not, Elam right now, I'm not getting that. It might be up here somewhere, but I'm not sure. But, and so the king, let's think about this too. Ahasuerus. Some will say Esther can't be trusted because we have a lot of documents from the Persian Empire. You'll see on your back there's the back of your sheet. There's some a picture of a tablet that's been carved in stone. There are lots of those, hundreds of those tablets or ostraca and other type of writings that came from the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was, I don't know, they weren't as brutal as these. Okay? I'm not saying that they were God-fearing or whatever, but it was the Persian Empire who allowed Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the walls. It's the Persian Empire that Mordecai and Esther are a part of. So the Persian Empire is is a little more like what you and I would think of in the sense of it allowed people their own faith. It absorbed other cultures and ethnic groups better, and it didn't persecute them as much. It was also a kingdom that was highly developed. They're known thousands of years later. The postal system of the Persian Empire was renowned, and it's actually referred to here in the Book of Esther. We're gonna see a passing comment in the Book of Esther about how readily you could send something to someone. The Persian Empire had this amazing ability to manage literally a postal system. They had a lot of ancient people in these cities had a lot more than we give them credit for. Many of them had hot water, running water. They had a lot of things that you and I think they did not. We've done a disservice to many ancient civilizations. Many of them were very advanced. Our concrete today doesn't compare to the concrete that the Romans built that lasted thousands of years. Roman roads, you can still find Roman roads in places today. So their technology was a lot better than we give them credit for. But anyway, so the Persians, they took over these and absorbed their empire and became larger. But now in those writings that we have translated, archaeologists and linguists have translated, the king is not referred to as Ahasuerus. And so a lot of scholars are like, where does this come from? This is not this is not what the Persians called their king. And you and I read that and we would think, who is that? What is that? Well, here's the surprising thing. Who is Ahasuerus? He is Xerxes the first. And the truth is, biblical scholars who believe that the Bible is trustworthy and inspired, they believe that what you have here in Ahasuerus is a Hebrew, essentially a Hebrew translation of Xerxes. Now, granted, you got to understand, we're taking it from Aramaic, ancient Aramaic, to ancient Hebrew, to ancient Greek, into modern English. So you and I look at this and we think Ahasuerus and Xerxes do not look like the same word. But just remember, they've traveled a long way before you and I, are looking at this. And so ancient linguists for ancient languages like Arab, the Arabic languages, the Hebrew and so forth, Semitic languages, some argue that this Hebrew has changed too. So this would be an ancient form of Hebrew, and it would literally be this was what the Hebrews called Xerxes the first. And if you know a little bit about Xerxes, he was one of the greatest, Persian kings. And like I say, he's mentioned in Daniel in a prophetic way. Daniel prophesies that Xerxes is going to rise up. And Xerxes, of course, is the one that allowed the Jews to flourish in many ways, and eventually rebuild the temple and the walls and all that. So it's pretty fascinating when you begin to put those things together. So who wrote the book of Esther? Well, we really don't know. And so here again, it does seem like that whoever wrote it, maybe it was Mordecai, because it does seem like whoever wrote it lived very close to that time period. I mean, did you pay attention to how it described the banquet? I mean, we're talking about the curtains here. What the curtains are hanging on and what the couches look like. I'm not saying that whoever wrote Esther was present at that banquet, but what we can say is that whoever wrote Esther was close enough to the original story to have maintained these kinds of details. Critics argue that it's too much detail, that there's, this is like fiction. And as of right now, here's our little spiritual dilemma. The Persian Empire is one of the empires that we have the most documents about. But Esther's never mentioned. In fact, Vashti is not mentioned. Mordecai is not mentioned. But have we translated all of them? No. And are we always reading it properly? Mordecai, let's look at the name of Mordecai. Okay. Now, this is not Hebrew. The name Mordecai is not Hebrew. It would be more Aramaic. Okay? One of the gods of the Persians was Marduk. So Mordecai is essentially Marduk. He's named a Persian name. You remember how Daniel was given a Babylonian name. Daniel's friends, the three Hebrew young men, they were given Babylonian names. That's part of the deprogramming. I said these groups would capture and then they would remove you. Part of the deprogramming was to remove your name. You would no longer carry your original native language name. You would be given a new name according to who just conquered you. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are Babylonianish type language. Okay? Another footnote. He that is faithful, I will give a new name in the city of my God. Wonder why we get a new name. Because he's our king. He's our conqueror. We belong to him now. So we get a new name. You see, it starts making sense, doesn't it? When you put it, I mean, I know some of you may be like, I hate history. Oh. If you're like that, I mean, I'm sorry, you know. I'm like Demetrius. I love history. To me, history is more amazing than fiction. The things sometimes that I read that happened are just amazing. And you think, this really did happen. This is not, nobody made this up, you know. So, and learning about these places, and it explains so much of the world we live in and why we are where we are and so forth. So if you don't like history, I know this is probably a little bit painful for you, and I'm sorry. But believe me, as we go through the book of Esther, it's not all going to be like this, but we do have to sort of lay this foundation so that we understand the world that Mordecai and Esther are living in. Okay, because it's going to be very different from the world you and I live in. Very different. And we're going to have to see it through the eyes of ancient Persia, not through the eyes of 2026 America, because that's what a lot of this social justice stuff is getting us in trouble as Christians. But anyway, Mordecai is literally an adaptation of Marduk. What's my point? My point is that the writings of the Persians were not written for Jews. It wasn't written for you and me. It was written usually for the king. And it's written in their language with their perspective, which means that Mordecai might be a way that the Jews said his name, but the Persians may have called him Marduk or something like that. And so when you're studying those ancient texts, you have to be careful to make sure they're not referring to the same person with a different name. You know, so it's a very technical thing. And the reason I'm saying that is, why doesn't something as big as Esther and this situation show up in Persian history? Well, the truth is, it might. It still may show up. You know, there was a long time they said that the Hittite Empire, the Bible referred to the Hittites, and they never existed. There's no evidence there was ever a Hittite Empire and so forth. Well, now we know the Hittite Empire was as big as Persia. So, you know, archaeologists are not, and historians are not always right. And so, why do we not see Esther in secular history of the Persian Empire? Well, maybe just because we haven't seen it yet. It may show up later, but I believe this is historical. I believe this happened. I believe Esther was a person and that Mordecai was a person. I believe all this took place. So I'm going to call it quits right there. Next week we'll pick it up in the text of Esther. We won't do the history lesson next week, I promise. But